You're listening to the Coach's Journey podcast, exposing the struggles and celebrating the successes in the life of coaches who are action takers and creating authentic impact in today's world. Whether you're just starting out, expanding your reach, or exploding your impact, you're in the right place right now. Stay tuned and be sure to subscribe to this podcast. Now, here are your hosts of the Coach's Journey podcast.
And that leads into another one of our values as a community, which literally has community in it. And it's we grow faster in community. And what you were just saying, Faisal, as the listener is kind of hearing these stories, is we do have these fears and these beliefs, these values, maybe values isn't quite the right word, but beliefs that live in our brain and we act on those. And they hold us back, limiting belief, whatever term you want to call it. But there are things that we were believing as truth, and so we're not acting. And the fastest way out of our own mind is when we're in community with other people and we can share what we're experiencing, share what we believe, share what's holding us back, and be able to get some objective perspectives that don't originate in our, or maybe they're tucked down there, but they're tamped down because there's fears on top, and so we can't access them. So community, we believe in the Coaching Mastery community. We believe that community is an instrumental part of growth, because without it, we're left to our own murky waters. And when I say murky waters, there's this analogy that always comes to mind when I think about how we live in our own mind. And it actually ties to a little bit to what you said, Faisal, about hearing is almost easier than coaching. And often, correct me if I'm wrong, you're far more expert in this than me, but, in mechanical engineering, you're typically working with a closed system. You've got all your parts and, and everything, how everything should interact with each other. But as humans, we're an open system, which means there's inputs, there's influences from all over the place that are often unpredictable. Well, in a way, that's more challenging, but there's also an opportunity for the system to be able to be corrected easier than if it's a closed system. And this is at least the way that I perceive things. And so when I think about living in my own mind, I think about that as like a pond of water that has no fresh source of water, which I think of as kind of like a little bit of the open system. And if you have a pond, we have ponds that exist in people's ranches and whatnot here where I live, and they get disgusting if there is no fresh water source, because they just fester, they get stinky. There's algae that grows and they get a bunch of mosquitoes and it's just gross. And then fish can't live in there. And so you constantly have to refresh it, the water source, so that the water doesn't get disgusting. That's kind of how I think about our brain, is that when we're just living in our own world, it gets infested and it gets disgusting. But if we're able to feed it with fresh water that's encouraging, supportive, nourishing, nurturing, which all of those are, I think, descriptors of a really good community, then you are able to get out of that nastiness and be able to move towards having clarity in what you're doing and how you're thinking and how you're moving towards or forward in the world. So that's the analogy that my brain always goes.
I love that analogy, and that's actually exactly what happens. I literally talked to a coach from our community, from one of the members who joined the community before. And it was Andrew, if you're watching, and he was sharing we're the most engaged community that he's been a part of, and he's not even a pro member. He's already talked to 3 different members of the community. They've helped him a lot, and ideally, and I told him it's just, I would encourage you to reach out to the rest of the members. We're all going to be the same way. Why? Because we're trying to build that culture.
Absolutely.
Within our communities to serve first. We're not asking you for anything. I didn't pitch anything. I encourage you to join us when you're ready, but keep moving. I encourage you to move your business forward in this direction. I gave him some value add, some tips to go in the right direction, but ultimately you need to be in these conversations for you to get the full value. And even when he was sharing it, I knew what he was doing, because I've done it so many times and I've heard so many coaches do it. He when was the last time you had these conversations with other coaches? What have you been focused on? And you could tell that he has been focused on this one or two things that was not working, and his mind was just repeating thoughts around same thing. And I laughed. I'm like, you just don't have new information. So that pond is becoming it's festering. There's not any fresh input.
Yeah.
And fresh input can be really powerful because one insight can completely change the direction, let alone consistent insight for you to kind of take what you can use. Like there's an unlimited amount of ideas, perspectives, ways there's so many things that I can't use a lot of them actually when we're in conversation. But even if I can use a couple of the things that we learned, then that tends to show up in my business and completely changes the direction of how I do things in terms of my coaching or business. And that's the power of the community is that, and by the way, you were talking about closed and open systems. Like when you're looking at it, this is, Alan Watts talked about this, that there is an illusion that we have, like as human beings, we walk around, we're not like trees where we're planted on the ground, but that's an illusion. Because what happens is you take away the air, you're not going to be able to survive. You take away the plants, you're going to struggle. You take away the animals, the same problem. You take away any component of the environment you're in, you're going to struggle.
Yeah.
Because you're an interconnected piece of everything. You're not like in our experience, we feel like a single self, but just as a living, we're part of a bigger system. That's why it's so complex. We're part of a much bigger system, but specifically as human beings, and this is why I don't believe you can help an individual. There are limits to that. You need to be dealing with the whole organization or family to some degree, or at least you need to be pushing that client to get them to open up their family or organization to that different way of thinking. I would ideally want them to get involved in coaching to some degree, but even if we can't do that, we can challenge the client to go towards opening up the line of conversation. Because like you said, a lot of people are I just want to grow. That doesn't work. Human beings don't work alone. We work with it as part of a bigger system. We're a social species. Our mind doesn't work like as a psychologist, that like our thinking doesn't even work alone. Our language is not something we invented as part of a community, it's part of a culture.
Yes.
So when you look at those things, like the power of community, a real community can make a big difference. And by real, I mean that it's a community that's working towards a specific vision, specific value sets, and they're consistently working towards that. Not just the name of the community, but what is their mission towards, what are they going towards? And in CMC, we do have a mission. We want to help coaches impact the world in a very powerful way. And we want to be able to bring more and more coaches who will be able to do that within our community.
Yeah. So as you're listening to this, you may not have a really strong value of community, and that's okay. I want to share a story about when I started coaching and was banging my head against the wall because I couldn't get some traction. And so at the beginning of my coaching journey, I certainly hadn't identified what are all my values as a coach and how am I going to portray those to clients. But of course, we all have values, whether we verbally and consciously recognize them or not, we have values. And as I was starting to coach, especially in the real estate space, which is what I do the most of, there's different kinds of investors in the real estate space. And I hadn't fully understood this until I got clarity through action. And I was launching, this was a couple of years ago now. My husband and I were both investors. We were launching a mastermind locally. It was actually, it was more than just a mastermind. It was a real estate investing association. For those of you that in the field, it's called a RIA for short. So we launched a RIA, and which meant that we had twice a month, we would have a meeting that was more content oriented, and then we'd have a meeting that was over lunchtime, and it was very much more of a social networking, just kind of a casual environment. And part of the mission of the RIA is to bring together investors to support each other. Well, for months and months and months, we had such a hard time getting people to show up consistently, getting buy-in, it was just like pulling teeth. And we were probably close to a year in when I was like, I don't understand what's going, like, I'm a failure, like I'm failing. What am I doing wrong? Well, when I examined it and talked to my marketing coach about it, So getting that external input is so important. I realized that I had a value of community that I was kind of putting out there, but I didn't really think through who I'm trying to attract. And I realized there was a disconnect between my mission as a coach and who I was trying to attract. Because a lot of who I was trying to attract, I won't get into details, but culturally in our local environment, there's very much a private, individual kind of perspective, and as well as in the field of real estate investing, there's certain types of investors that are extremely community oriented, which I had really not been introduced to yet. And then there are some that are able to work, successfully have their entire investment career just by themselves, really not having to do a lot of collaboration. And that's actually who I was targeting. I didn't realize it, but there was an absolute misfit. And so I spent so much time and energy trying to cultivate this thing to happen. And it didn't, because I was marketing to the wrong people, the wrong message to the wrong people. Well, it's right message to the wrong people. But if I wanted those people, I should have changed my message. And so I share this as an example that as a coach, the more that you can get clarity around the kinds of people that you're trying to attract based on the kinds of experiences that you're wanting to help facilitate, that will really help you feel or have a different perspective that you're maybe not the problem. It's not that you didn't post quite enough videos or have enough engagement on Facebook or Twitter, or you didn't have the right dance on TikTok or whatever. It may not be that. It may be there's this misfit between who you're pursuing and the message you're giving, because you're not as clear on the values that you're offering through what you do. So I hope there's some points of connection that you guys as listeners are able to make with that.
Yeah, I think that's very powerful. And I think it comes down to what are we actually talking about? And this is very interesting because we live especially when you're in Canada and US, or at least parts of US, there's a huge political movement going on around limiting how you talk, what you can share, what you can talk about. And I can't tell you how many clients have, especially in that initial session, when I ask them go towards courage, and I ask them where are the areas you're not showing up? He's like, I'm not speaking my mind. Why not? It's like, I feel like it's going to be politically taken the wrong way. It's going to be politically incorrect, even though they don't believe in that.
Yeah.
But they're scared that they will be judged, or they'll be ridiculed, or they'll be shunned from whatever circle they're part of. And nobody's immune. It's and they could be very courageous in every part of their life, but they will struggle in that part because it's such a big force that's happening. It's like, no, we need to be careful about what you say here, there, and the other. And I'm not talking about the political side of it, just looking at it from a basic human self-expression point of view. Is that if I come from a world, and this is very interesting for me because a lot of people don't see the value of it here in the Western world because they grew up with it. You take it something you grew up with for granted. But for example, when you go to the Eastern world, the systems are not set up like that. You can't actually speak up against anybody. It's very hard if you speak up against a specific politician or a public figure or somebody, you will be prosecuted legally or illegally. There are no boundaries there because they have a lot of influence. There are no legal things preventing them from doing anything to you. So most people don't talk. In fact, actually, if you go to the Middle Eastern, I've heard this from so many of my friends who are part of that world, is that one of the first things that for example, dictators would do is that as soon as they go into power, one of the first things that they limit is public gatherings. Coffee shops become illegal. Now think about it. This sounds ridiculous here, but coffee shops are where dialogues happen, where people talk about things that matter to them. And ultimately goes back to the bigger systems of government and what's happening in the world. They didn't want that to happen. Now it's the same things that are happening in the world on this side of the world, except it's being done perfectly through value systems. Is that no, we shouldn't speak up because it's going to hurt another person. And obviously, as a coach, I'm incredibly empathetic. I don't want people to be hurt. But in the meantime, that expression of who you are and what matters to you, we need to consistently have a dialogue around it. And as soon as you limit that dialogue, then you can't move ahead. And it's the same thing will show up in your coaching sessions. So it'll be very interesting. coaches who buy into a belief that they can't ask certain things because that might be hurtful to somebody, they won't ask direct questions.
Yeah.
They'll beat around the bush. And the reason why I'm sharing this, not for a political reason, but for you to, that the systems we live in, they have an impact on us. Our family has an impact. Our governments have an impact. When we hear things over and over, they have an impact. We might not realize it, but all these things have an impact. And being aware of like how you're showing up and what you're expressing matters. And so you need to make your own decision. When you're out on social media, are you speaking your heart? Are you speaking your mind? Or you are limiting that based on what you're told you can talk about or what you can't talk about? And I can bet the things that you're holding behind are your core values, and you're afraid that somebody will react to that negatively. In fact, that might be a really good marketing strategy if somebody reacts to that.
Absolutely. So the last three core values that we have as a community, as you've been listening to us talk and our story in the community today, you're going to recognize and pick up on some of these things, which goes back to the importance as a coach of you sharing stories. It doesn't matter what the stories, it could be stories generally of some client struggles. Obviously, be super careful that you change any of the important aspects so that the client may not happen to listen and be like, oh my gosh, they just shared my life story. They just betrayed me. And confidence, like you be super careful in that. But one of our core values is always be coached. And you can see that because we have a coaching circle. Like we're always getting coached. So we have a value around coaching, because wouldn't we be hypocritical if we said and advertised as coaches, coaching is a game changer, is a life changer. It will level you up. It will, help you be your best you and help you have the most influence in the world. But then if we were asked, oh, so you're being coached then, right? And we said, no, not really. Like that would be hypocritical. There would be a break in our integrity of what we say and what we're doing. And so always be coached is part of our core values. And you would have picked up on that based on our story. So as you're sharing stories about yourself and your life and your values, your potential clients and your current clients are also going to pick up on those things. The last two values are delivering high value, which I already said is kind of vanilla. So it's embedded in all of these other things. But we, as a coaching mastery community, we are committed to delivering high value coupled with getting highly paid. And so I think that's something that if you're in our community, you recognize, because getting highly paid doesn't happen by accident. There's some thoughtful business structures and decisions that happen in order for getting highly paid to happen, which is why we have a whole section in our community, a whole learning track on business mastery, in addition to coaching mastery. And so that is in full context, kind of what we've broken down as our community, as our core values. And so the question I'm passing off to you as a listener, as a coach, what are your core values? And if you don't have them clearly identified that you can just rattle off for somebody, this may be a great opportunity for you to take 5 minutes or an hour, depending on, and starting to jot them down. And don't censor yourself. This is the kind of thing that as a coach, you probably say these same things to your client. It's a great opportunity to just let things free flow. What do you value? What would you want to see your clients value? What do you think is going to be helpful in order to build the synergy and growth and in your clients and in your coaching business that can help on both sides?
You're listening to the Coach's Journey podcast.